When Adrian Vale entered the room, the body lay perfectly still. The door was locked and the key was inside. There were no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, and no witnesses. So tell me, how could anyone have left? It was 6:42 in the morning when Adrian's phone rang. He almost ignored it, but when he saw the name, Detective Marcus Hale, he answered. Marcus rarely called unless something didn't quite make sense. "There's a case," Marcus said, his voice clipped and serious. "Wealthy businessman, dead in his apartment, locked room. No sign anyone entered or left." Adrian was silent for a moment. Locked rooms were never simple. They were performances, carefully staged productions, and someone had orchestrated this one with meticulous care. The apartment was on the 12th floor, modern, minimal, and expensive. It felt too quiet, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. The victim, Daniel Hargrove, lay beside the dining table. There were no visible wounds, no signs of a struggle, just stillness. The front door was bolted from the inside, the chain latch still securely in place. The key was resting on the wooden floor as if it had simply fallen there. Adrian checked the windows. They were all closed. The balcony door was locked from the inside. On the table sat a cup of coffee, half full. It was still faintly warm when the first officers arrived. Across the room, a large wall clock had stopped at exactly 3:17. But Adrian didn't look at the body first. He always looked at the details, the tiny inconsistencies that tell the real story. And that's when he saw it. Tiny scratches around the interlock mechanism on the door. They were almost invisible, but they were deliberate. Someone with a very steady hand had made them. There were 3 immediate suspects. First, the wife. She claimed she was visiting relatives outside the city and had the plane tickets to prove it. At least, that's what she wanted everyone to believe. Second, the business partner. They were recently involved in a severe financial dispute with millions of dollars at stake. Motive was practically dripping from that one. And third, the building guard. He was on duty all night and swore that no one entered and no one left. But someone had. They always do. Adrian walked back to the table where the coffee sat. He noticed 2 coasters, but only 1 cup. Interesting. He examined the cup carefully. There was a faint lipstick stain on the rim, almost wiped clean, but not completely. Daniel Hargrove lived alone, and his wife was supposedly out of town. The timeline was the next piece of the puzzle. The coroner estimated the time of death between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:17, right in the middle of that window. But here was the problem. The clock had no internal damage. It hadn't fallen off the wall and it hadn't been struck. Someone had manually stopped it. Why stage the time of death unless the time itself was a lie? The fingerprint analysis came back late that evening. 1 set of prints matched Daniel Hargrove, as expected. The second set, found on the coffee cup and a few other surfaces, belonged to his wife. She had returned, secretly. There was no record of her flight arrival, no taxi logs, and no record of her entering the building, which meant she never used the elevator. She had taken the stairs, avoiding the cameras and the guard at the front desk. Adrian returned to the front door and stared at the lock again. Those tiny scratches finally made sense. A thin, flexible metal strip could be slid through the crack of the door to slide the latch from the outside. With a bit of skill, you could relock the door and even drop the key on the floor inside using a simple string. It was an elegant, cold, and calculated method. When confronted with the evidence, the wife broke down. The financial dispute with her husband was real. Daniel had planned to restructure his inheritance, leaving her with almost nothing. She had returned that night, enraged, to confront him. The argument escalated. The coffee wasn't poisoned. It was a distraction, a moment of normalcy before the chaos. The murder itself was quick, controlled, and deeply personal. Case closed? Not quite. As the forensics team processed the apartment, Adrian, acting on a hunch, opened a small side drawer near the desk. Inside was a single black glove. It was made of fine leather, pristine, and didn't belong to the wife or to Daniel. There were no fingerprints inside, just one small stitched symbol near the wrist. It was a mark Adrian had seen once before, years ago, on a case that was never officially solved. He stared at it for longer than he should have. This wasn't just a domestic murder born of greed and anger. Someone else had been here. Someone had been watching. Someone had anticipated this confrontation. And someone wanted Adrian to find that glove. As Adrian left the building and stepped into the cool night air, he felt it. That quiet shift in the atmosphere, the unnerving sense of being observed. From a window high above or a car parked down the street, he didn't know. But he knew one thing for sure. Someone is watching and they're getting closer. This case was far from over. It was just the beginning. Thanks for watching. If you love a good mystery, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next.